Imagine dedicating your entire life to raising your only son, sacrificing sleep, dreams, and even your health, only to be told years later that you're nothing more than a burden. That's exactly what happened to me. One night, after yet another argument, my son looked me straight in the eyes and said, "Mom, you're just an extra mouth to feed. We don't need you here anymore." And with that, he shoved me out of the very house I had helped pay for, the house where I raised him from a little boy into a man. Standing outside with nothing but a suitcase, I felt like my world had shattered. Neighbors stared, whispers filled the night, and all I could hear was his cruel voice echoing in my head. The pain of being rejected by the one person I loved most in this world was unbearable. But here's the twist he never saw coming. That night didn't break me. It transformed me. Instead of giving up, I found a way to rise. Months later, I would return, not as the unwanted mother he cast aside, but as the new owner of his house. And when I tripled his rent, he finally realized the cost of betraying family. There was a time when my life revolved around nothing but my son. From the very moment he was placed in my arms at the hospital, tiny and fragile, I knew my purpose in life had shifted entirely. I wasn't just living for myself anymore. I was living for him. His first cry, his tiny fingers gripping mine, the way his chest rose and fell as he slept on my shoulder, those were the treasures that made every hardship worth enduring. When his father passed away unexpectedly, grief could have consumed me. But every time I looked into my son's eyes, I saw a reason to keep going. I worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, just to keep the lights on and the rent paid. There were nights when my body ached so badly I could hardly stand. But as soon as I saw his smile when he opened his lunchbox at school, a lunch I'd packed with care, even if it was just a simple sandwich and an apple, I felt strength surge back into me. I remember birthdays where we couldn't afford much, so I baked him a small cake from scratch. He would blow out the candles with such joy as if I had given him the world. I remember Christmas mornings when the gifts were few, but his excitement was boundless, ripping open wrapping paper to find a toy car or a second-hand book I had saved up to buy. To him, it wasn't about the cost. It was about the love behind it. And oh, the little moments. Sitting together at the kitchen table, doing homework, him struggling through fractions while I patiently explained step by step. Walking him to school in the pouring rain, my coat draped over his tiny shoulders while I got soaked through. Staying up all night when he had a fever, placing cool cloths on his forehead, whispering softly that everything would be all right. I told him stories at bedtime about courage, kindness, and loyalty, hoping those words would shape him into a man who valued people above possessions, who understood that family was the greatest gift of all. He used to curl up beside me, eyes wide, asking questions about the characters, and sometimes falling asleep before I even reached the ending. Those nights were my happiest, listening to his soft breathing, knowing he felt safe because I was there. When he graduated elementary school, I cheered the loudest. When he played soccer, I was the parent on the sidelines clapping until my hands stung. I wasn't perfect, but every ounce of energy I had went into making sure he felt loved, supported, and never alone. Even as he grew older and more independent, I kept giving, quietly, endlessly. I paid for his college application fees by working overtime. I stayed up worrying about him when he was out late with friends, waiting by the door with a warm meal just in case he was hungry. I held on to every picture he drew, every little note he wrote me, as if they were priceless works of art. My love for him wasn't measured in money or material things. It was measured in sleepless nights, in sacrifices no one saw, in the silent prayers I whispered for him every morning before I left for work. He was my world, my everything. And for the longest time, I truly believed I was his too. At first, I told myself nothing had really changed. My son had just gotten married, started a busier job, and was now juggling new responsibilities. It was natural, I thought, that he didn't have as much time to sit with me, laugh with me, or share every detail of his day like before. But small cracks began to show, and once I noticed them, I couldn't unsee them. It started with his tone. The boy who once called me every afternoon just to ask, "Mom, what are you doing? Did you eat yet?" began answering my questions with short, clipped responses. "Yeah." "No? I'm busy." Our conversations, once warm and endless, dwindled into a few seconds of strained words. One evening, I cooked his favorite chicken soup. It was the very dish he used to beg for whenever he got sick, the one that had soothed him since childhood. I placed the steaming bowl in front of him, expecting a smile, maybe even a thank you. Instead, he barely touched it. He stirred the broth with his spoon, sighed, and said flatly, "Mom, I don't really eat this anymore. Too greasy." It felt like someone had poured cold water over me. That soup wasn't just food. It was love, care, years of motherhood condensed into a bowl. To him, it was just inconvenient. His wife's words began to follow. At first, they were subtle. "Maybe Mom should rest more. Let us handle things." But slowly, they sharpened. "Don't you think your mom is around a bit too much?" I would hear it from the next room, her hushed tones followed by his silence. He didn't defend me. He didn't say a word. That silence hurt worse than anything she could have said. Soon, I noticed I was being excluded. When guests came, they didn't ask me to sit with them anymore. Meals that once filled the dining room with laughter turned into something else. They would eat together, then leave a plate aside for me in the kitchen. I would sit alone at the table, the clinking of my chopsticks the only sound in a house that once overflowed with joy. The distance grew. He began staying out late, coming home tired, barely acknowledging me. The goodnight hugs stopped. Even the occasional smile seemed to vanish. And when I asked simple things, "Are you okay? Did you eat?" he would look at me with eyes that no longer held warmth, only irritation. I tried to tell myself it was stress, that he still loved me, just differently. But deep down, I knew. A wall was rising between us, brick by brick, and one day soon, it would shut me out completely. The silence between us didn't last long. Silence has a way of rotting into something worse: resentment, frustration, even anger. And in our house, that silence eventually erupted into arguments. It started small, almost unnoticeable. One morning, I reminded him to take an umbrella because the sky looked dark. It was something I'd always done. Those little motherly habits that never fade, no matter how old your child grows. But instead of the grateful smile I expected, he snapped, "Mom, I'm not a kid anymore. Stop treating me like one." I froze. It wasn't the words that hurt, but the sharpness in his voice, the annoyance in his eyes. He had said similar things before, but never with such hostility. Days later, I commented that the living room was messy and suggested we tidy up before guests arrived. His response cut me even deeper. "Mom, this is our house. If you don't like the way we live, maybe you should just keep to your own space." That word, "our," stung. Didn't he remember that I had contributed money to buy this house in the first place? That every corner, every wall held pieces of my life, my sacrifices? But in that moment, I realized, in his mind, I was already an outsider. The arguments escalated. His wife began joining in, sometimes directly, sometimes through subtle remarks that only fueled the fire. One evening, when I suggested we have dinner together as a family, she smirked and said, "We're adults now. We don't need to sit around like children at the table every night." My son didn't defend me. Instead, he sighed and muttered, "She's right, Mom. Stop forcing old traditions." I felt invisible. I felt like a ghost haunting the house I once called home. The fights grew louder, uglier. "Why are you always interfering?" he shouted one night after I gently reminded him to save more money instead of spending recklessly. "Because I care about you," I cried. "No, you don't care. You control. That's what you've always done." His words struck me like knives. All those years of sacrifices, working 2 jobs, skipping meals so he could eat, stitching his clothes late into the night, were now being painted as control. I tried to reason with him. I told him I only wanted what was best. But every attempt was met with anger, with rolling eyes, with the cruel suggestion that I was in the way. The final straw came during a family gathering. Relatives had come over, and I made the mistake of offering my opinion on something small: where to set the extra chairs. His wife laughed, shaking her head, and said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Your mom always has to control everything, doesn't she?" Everyone chuckled awkwardly. My son didn't say a word. He didn't stop her. He didn't stand up for me. When the guests left, I confronted him. "Why didn't you defend me? Why would you let her humiliate me like that?" He looked at me coldly and said, "Because she's right. You always meddle. You don't know when to stop." That was the moment I realized I had lost him. Not just his warmth, but his respect. The house that once echoed with laughter was now filled with shouting, slammed doors, and tears muffled into pillows. Every day felt like walking on broken glass, never knowing what simple word or action would spark the next explosion. And though I tried desperately to hold on to him, to salvage what little bond we had left, I could feel the rope between us fraying, thread by painful thread. I didn't know it yet, but the cruelest wound was still waiting. The night he would cast me out completely. The night it happened is etched into my memory with painful clarity. I had lived through countless arguments, endured cold shoulders and harsh words, but deep down, I still clung to a fragile hope that my son would never truly abandon me. But hope can be cruel. It was late evening, and the house was unusually quiet. My son and his wife sat in the living room, their faces serious, as if they had been waiting for me. My heart sank instantly. I could sense something was about to change forever. "Mom, we need to talk," my son said, his voice firm but trembling slightly. I sat down across from them, clutching my hands together. "What is it?" I asked softly, though fear already wrapped around my chest. He didn't look at me right away. Instead, he glanced at his wife, who gave him a subtle nod. Then, with a deep breath, he said, "Mom, this isn't working anymore. Living together, it's just too much." My throat tightened. "Too much?" I whispered. "What do you mean?" He shifted uncomfortably. "You interfere. You criticize. You make everything harder. We need our own space. We need to live without another mouth to feed." Another mouth. The words shattered me. Not a mother, not family, not the woman who raised him with everything she had. Just another mouth. Tears burned at the back of my eyes, but I forced myself to stay calm. "I've tried my best," I said, my voice breaking. "I've done everything to help, to love, to support you." His wife leaned forward, her tone sharper than his. Your best isn't good enough. We're adults now. We don't need someone watching our every move, judging us, or dragging us down. This is our home. And honestly, it's time for you to go. Her words echoed like a sentence in a courtroom. I turned back to my son, desperate for him to deny it, to take it back. But he didn't. He just looked at me with cold, tired eyes and said quietly, She's right, Mom. I think it's better if you leave. The room spun. My chest felt like it was caving in. Leave? I asked in disbelief. This is my home too. I helped you buy this house. I sacrificed so much. How can you ask me to leave? His jaw tightened. You've done enough. But this isn't your place anymore. I broke then. Tears spilled freely down my face as I pleaded, my hands shaking. Son, please. I have nowhere else to go. Don't do this to me. I'm your mother. For the first time, I thought I saw a flicker of guilt cross his face, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. He stood up, walked to the hallway, and placed my small suitcase, the one I hadn't even realized was packed, by the door. You'll be fine, he muttered. It's better this way. I stared at that suitcase as though it were a coffin, holding the remains of my life. Every folded piece of clothing inside was a reminder of what I had given up for him, and now it was all being shoved out like garbage. My knees weakened, and I sank into the chair. How could you? I whispered. After everything I gave, after everything I lost for you, how could you throw me away like this? But there was no answer, only silence. Finally, I stood, wiping my tears with trembling hands. I picked up the suitcase, though it felt heavier than the world itself. At the doorway, I turned one last time, searching my son's face for any sign of regret, any flicker of love that might save me from this abyss. But he didn't meet my eyes. He turned away. The door closed behind me with a dull thud, and just like that, I was no longer welcome in the home I had once built with my love. I stepped into the cold night air, the streetlights casting long shadows on the pavement. The weight of betrayal pressed down on me, heavier than the suitcase in my hand. I had been reduced, not to a mother, not to a human being, but to an extra mouth my own child no longer wanted. And as I walked away, tears blurring my vision, I knew a part of me had died on that doorstep. But another part, though faint, began to stir. A spark that whispered, This is not the end. One day, they will understand what they've lost. That night, I was thrown out of the very house once filled with laughter. Carrying an old suitcase, standing alone in a dark alley, I felt as if my life had ended. Yet in that painful moment, I realized one thing. If I collapsed, I would forever be seen as worthless. I had to stand up. I had to begin again. The first days were unbearable. I rented a tiny, damp room, cold and lonely. By day, I went everywhere looking for work, only to be rejected because of my age. Some even said, You're too old. What can you possibly do now? Every word cut like a knife, but deep inside, it fueled my determination to prove them wrong. Eventually, I found a job cleaning offices at night. During the day, I took on whatever work I could, sewing, babysitting, selling snacks. Each night, I came home exhausted, but when I looked at the few crumpled bills in my hand, I felt a small spark of pride. I still had value. Loneliness, however, was the hardest battle. For years, every joy I had was tied to my son. Now, meals were silent, nights unbearably long. To cope, I went to the library, joined a small reading club, people who had also endured loss. We shared our stories, lifted each other up, and slowly, I felt my spirit return. I began learning about small trade. With my savings, I started a little stall in the market, selling homemade pastries and crafts. At first, hardly anyone came. Many rainy days, I sat for hours without a single customer. But one afternoon, a woman smiled and said, "Your cakes are delicious. What I love most is your smile." Tears filled my eyes. In that moment, I realized my worth had never truly disappeared. Step by step, more customers returned. I reinvested, improved my packaging, and soon people came back not just for the food, but for the warmth I tried to give. It wasn't always easy. Some days I lost money, some days I had to throw goods away. But I kept reminding myself, I'm not living to take revenge. I'm living to prove I still deserve this life. After a year, my efforts bore fruit. I could finally rent a small shop inside a modest shopping center. No more standing in the rain. I began to build a circle of loyal customers. Friends from the library, market neighbors, and returning buyers became my new family, filling the emptiness my son had left behind. One afternoon, while listening to a conversation at the library, my heart froze. I overheard that my old house, the very place full of memories, and the same place where I had been cruelly cast out, was now up for sale. I stood there in silence, trembling. Part of me wanted to walk away, but another part whispered that this was fate knocking at my door. Was I brave enough to face it? I didn't yet know, but deep down I felt it. My journey was not over. The greatest test was still to come. When I first heard that my old house was up for sale, my heart stopped for a moment. That place wasn't just brick and wood. It was the container of my memories, my sacrifices, my entire life's worth of love. Within its walls echoed the laughter of my little boy chasing after me, the warm aroma of homemade soup filling the kitchen on cold nights, the quiet rustle of my hands mending clothes in the middle of the night so he could have a better future. That house was love. That house was sacrifice. That house was me. And yet, it was also the place where I had been cast out. The same walls that once sheltered me bore witness to the cruel words that broke me apart. The thought of reclaiming it brought me a strange mix of fear and longing. At first, I told myself it was impossible. I didn't have the money. Even after years of working multiple jobs, saving every penny, and cutting back on every luxury, the price of the house still loomed like an insurmountable wall. I spent nights staring at the numbers, my savings on one side, the market price on the other. The gap was wide, too wide, but something inside me stirred. For so long, I had been living with the pain of being unwanted, of being treated as a burden. Maybe buying that house wasn't just about real estate. Maybe it was about dignity, about showing myself that I could rise again. The days that followed were filled with restless thoughts. I walked past the house more than once, standing at the corner of the street like a stranger, staring at the windows I had once cleaned, the garden I had once tended with my own hands. My chest ached with both love and grief, and then help came from unexpected places. People who had witnessed my struggles, neighbors, old friends, even loyal customers from the small shop I now ran, began to encourage me. Some offered advice, others offered loans, and a few simply gave me strength with their words. You deserve this. That house is not just brick and stone, it is a symbol of your survival. Yet my heart was still heavy. What if my son found out? Would he hate me even more? Would he see this as revenge rather than resilience? I lay awake, night after night, torn between fear and determination. Memories of him as a child flooded back. The way his tiny hand once held mine so tightly, his innocent eyes filled with trust. I had promised to protect him forever. Now, here I was, contemplating becoming the new owner of the very roof under which he had cast me aside. One morning, after yet another sleepless night, I looked at my reflection in the mirror. What I saw wasn't the broken, abandoned parent I once felt like. No, I saw someone who had endured storms, who had bent but not broken. And at that moment, I whispered to myself, "This is not about revenge. This is about reclaiming who I am." With trembling hands, I signed the contract. My pen felt heavy, but my heart surged with a strength I hadn't felt in years. And when the keys were finally placed into my palm, I wept. Not from spite, but from a deep, cathartic release. Those keys weren't just metal. They were proof that I had survived, that I had fought, that I had risen. The house was mine again, not as a victim, not as someone cast out, but as someone who had endured and rebuilt. Yet, deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. A day would come when I would have to face my son inside those walls once more. And when that moment came, I would no longer tremble. I was ready. The day he found out was one I will never forget. I had been preparing for it ever since the ink dried on the contract, but nothing could have truly readied me for the look in his eyes. It started like any ordinary morning. The tenants of the building, my son and his family among them, received a notice. It wasn't harsh, just a formal letter informing them of the change in ownership. My name was printed at the bottom in neat black ink. For hours, silence followed. Then a knock thundered at my small office door. When I opened it, there he stood. My son, the boy I had raised, the boy I had once carried on my shoulders, the boy who had cast me out. His face was pale, his eyes wide with disbelief, as if the ground beneath him had suddenly vanished. "You?" he whispered, almost choking on the word. This can't be true." I nodded slowly. "Yes, it's true. I'm the new owner of this house." For a moment, he simply stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like he was searching for air. His hands trembled, his entire frame rigid with a mix of confusion, fear, and, though he tried to hide it, shame. "You bought the house?" he asked again, his voice breaking. "Yes," I said, steady though my heart pounded in my chest. "I bought it." He laughed then, a hollow, desperate laugh. "This is some kind of joke, isn't it? Some cruel trick?" But when he saw the papers I laid on the desk, the official stamp, the legal proof, his laughter died instantly. His shoulders sagged, and for the first time in years, he looked small to me. Not the man who had ordered me out, but the boy who once ran into my arms when storms frightened him at night. "Why?" he finally asked. His voice was barely audible. "Why would you do this?" I took a breath, steadying myself. "Because this house holds my blood, my sweat, my memories. Because I worked and suffered for it long before you ever called it yours. Because I needed to reclaim what was taken from me." He shook his head, stepping back as if the truth itself burned. "No, no, this is revenge. That's all this is." His words pierced me, but I met his gaze. "No, this isn't revenge. It's survival. It's dignity. It's me proving, to myself more than anyone, that I am not disposable." Silence filled the room. He turned away, running his hands through his hair, pacing like a trapped animal. I could almost see the storm raging inside him. Anger, humiliation, confusion, guilt. His wife entered moments later, holding the notice in her hand, her eyes darting between us. "Is it true?" she asked him. He didn't answer. He couldn't. He simply sat down, his head buried in his hands. The weight of the situation sank into the air like a stone into water. He now realized that the walls around him, the roof above his family, no longer belonged to him, but to the very parent he had rejected. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I simply stood, quietly, with the strength of someone who had endured too much pain to find joy in another's downfall. But inside, I felt something shift. For the first time in years, the balance of power between us had changed. I was no longer the helpless parent begging for shelter. I was no longer the extra mouth. I was the one holding the keys, and he knew it. The silence stretched until finally he lifted his head. His eyes, red-rimmed and wet with unshed tears, locked onto mine. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice trembling. I didn't answer immediately, because what would happen next? That was the part that would change everything. The air in the room was thick, as if every unsaid word weighed it down. My son sat across from me, his fists clenched on the table. His wife hovered at his side, her lips pressed tightly together, unwilling to speak, but desperate to hear what would come next. Finally, he broke the silence. "So, you're the owner now. What's your plan?" I studied him carefully. His tone wasn't just curious. It was laced with defiance, almost a challenge. As if he still believed he could wrest control back from me, even when the deed itself carried my name. My voice was calm, deliberate. "The plan is simple. The building needs repairs. Maintenance costs have risen. And rent must reflect that." His eyes narrowed. "Rent?" "Yes," I said. "Starting next month, every tenant, including you, will pay 3 times the current rent." The words dropped like a stone into water. His wife gasped, covering her mouth. My son shot to his feet, his chair scraping against the floor with a screech. "Triple?" he barked. "Are you insane?" I didn't flinch. "I am the landlord. It's my decision. The rate is fair compared to the market. You'll pay it, just like everyone else." He slammed his palm on the table, his face flushing red. "You can't do this to us. We have kids. We can barely make ends meet as it is. Triple rent will destroy us." I looked at him steadily. "Do you remember the day you told me I was just an extra mouth to feed? That I was a burden? You had no problem throwing me out into the street without a second thought. Now, you expect mercy?" His jaw tightened. The anger in his eyes flickered with something else. Shame. But pride kept him from lowering his voice. "That was different. You're my father. You should have understood the pressure we were under." I leaned forward, my voice sharp now. "I did understand. That's why I left without a fight. That's why I built myself back up from nothing, brick by brick, day by day. But you never once looked back. Not a call, not a message, nothing. You erased me as if I had died. And now, you ask for understanding?" His wife tugged at his sleeve, whispering, "Please, calm down." But he shook her off, his pride blazing brighter than reason. "This is punishment," he accused. "You're doing this just to get back at me." I shook my head. "No, this is business, and perhaps a lesson life wanted you to learn. Comfort is never guaranteed. Family is never disposable, and respect is earned, not demanded." He was trembling now, torn between rage and despair. His eyes glistened as he whispered, "If we can't pay, will you throw us out?" The question hung in the air like a blade. My heart twisted, but my voice stayed firm. "Yes, just like you did to me." The silence after that was suffocating. His wife lowered her gaze, tears spilling silently down her cheeks. My son sank back into his chair, His body deflated, as if all the air had been punched out of him. I let the moment sit, not to humiliate him, but because he needed to feel the weight of his choices. For too long, he had believed consequences were for others, never for him. Finally, I spoke again, softer this time. I don't take joy in this, son, but you need to understand. Life has a way of turning tables. Today, it's me holding the keys. Tomorrow, it could be someone else holding power over you. Treat people well, especially family, because you never know when you'll need the very hand you once pushed away. He didn't answer. He couldn't. His pride had been shattered, and in its place sat a man confronted not just by his father, but by his own reflection, the ugliness of his choices staring back at him. As I gathered my papers and stood, I left him with one final thought. You called me an extra mouth, but remember this, the mouth you fed once now controls the roof over your head. With that, I walked away, leaving behind silence heavy enough to crush even the strongest of egos. The night after our confrontation, I couldn't sleep. The image of my son's face, shocked, broken, humiliated, haunted me. For years, I had dreamed of this moment. The tables turned, the power in my hands, the chance to show him what it felt like to be cast aside. And yet, now that it had happened, victory felt hollow. I had rebuilt my life from ashes. I had proven my strength, my resilience, and even the ability to forgive myself for the years of silent suffering. But as I stared at the ceiling, I realized something. Revenge had never been my true goal. What I had wanted, more than anything, was recognition. To be seen, to be valued, to be loved by my own blood. The next morning, I returned to the house. My son sat at the kitchen table, his shoulders hunched, eyes red from a sleepless night. His wife greeted me cautiously, offering tea with trembling hands. The atmosphere was heavy, but different, less defiant, more fragile. Father, my son's voice cracked. He paused, swallowed hard, and tried again. I was wrong. The words hung in the air, almost unreal. For years, I had waited for them, doubted I would ever hear them. My chest tightened, but I said nothing, waiting. I thought having a family meant providing, working, controlling. I thought love was about sacrifice, but only theirs, never mine. I pushed you away because I was afraid of weakness, afraid of failure, and I made you pay the price for my pride. Tears welled in his eyes, and this time, he didn't hide them. When you said you'd evict us, I saw myself. I saw the night I threw you out. I saw your face, the same way you saw mine yesterday, and for the first time, I understood what I had done to you. His words pierced through me deeper than any knife. My son, my pride, my failure, my hope, was finally breaking down the wall he had built between us. I let out a slow breath. I don't want you to suffer, son. That was never my purpose. But you needed to feel the weight of your choices, just as I once felt mine. He bowed his head. I understand, and I don't deserve forgiveness. But if there's even a small piece of your heart that still sees me as your son, I beg you, don't abandon us. Silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken emotions. Then, slowly, I reached across the table and placed my hand on his. His fingers trembled beneath mine, like a child again. I never stopped being your father, I whispered. Even when you rejected me, even when you erased me from your home, I still prayed for you. I still carried you in my heart. Forgiveness doesn't erase pain, but it opens the door for healing. And I am ready to walk through that door with you, if you are. His tears spilled freely now, dripping onto the table. He clutched my hand tightly, as though afraid I might disappear again. For the first time in years, we sat not as enemies, not as landlord and tenant, but as father and son. The deeper message life often brings us full circle. The people we dismiss today may hold the key to our tomorrow. The hands we push away may be the very hands we one day reach for in desperation. This story is not just about a father who lost everything and built himself back up. It is about the fragile threads of family, how pride can sever them, and how humility can weave them back together. To those listening, perhaps you have your own family wounds, words spoken in anger, bridges burned in silence, love withheld out of pride. Ask yourself, if the tables turned tomorrow, what would remain? Would you find regret? Or would you find reconciliation? Because at the end of every argument, every betrayal, every wound, family still whispers beneath it all. Come home. I looked at my son one last time that morning, and with a tired but genuine smile, I said, "Let's start over." And in that moment, the house, once a symbol of division, became something new. Not just bricks and walls, but a place where brokenness could be mended, a place where forgiveness was stronger than pride, a place we could finally call home.